session for folks who haven't been able to make it today or will be coming late, so that they can watch it later. If you're uncomfortable being on camera, please feel free to go off camera. We also ask that you be on mute during this time, and there will be opportunities to ask questions, and we can utilize the chat to ask those questions. To start, my name is Jennifer Parrish Taylor. I'm the Director of Advocacy here at the Urban League of Portland. I also cover our public policy as well. On my team are Stephanie Phillips Bridges, our Senior Policy Analyst, and Miles Larson, a Policy Analyst. Today, we will be speaking to our accomplishments this past short session, what that means for our community, and the unfinished business that remains. If you have questions, as I said, throughout today's presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them. And thanks so much for joining us. If you can go to the next slide, please. Next slide after this. So as a reminder, Oregon's legislative short session was from February 5th and ran until March 10th, so it's about 6 weeks. Our work during the legislative session was focused on criminal justice reform, economic justice, education, environmental justice, food insecurity, government reform, health, housing and homelessness, language justice, voting reform, and workforce development. So we were pretty busy during those 6 weeks. The ACE department, or the Advocacy and Civic Engagement Department, tracked just a handful of bills during this legislative session. And our top priority bills, we provided testimony, hosted community events, and pushed information out on our social media platforms. I'm going to have Stephanie talk a little bit more about our day of action.
Thank you, Jennifer. So we hosted our Legislative Day of Action on March 6th. We were joined by several community members and partners, coalition partners. So before we jump into the meat of our success and unfinished business, we wanted to take a moment to uplift the Day of Action, where we received a warm welcome from the community with the community folks that we brought from Representative Travis Nelson, and I will play the video here.
Thank you, Representative. Further courtesies, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to welcome the Urban League of Portland to the Capitol. They've been working for nearly 80 years to empower Black people and others across Oregon and Southwest Washington to achieve equality in various aspects of our daily lives, such as education, employment, health, economic security, and quality of life. Their legislative agenda focuses on criminal justice reform, economic justice, education, environmental justice, security, health, housing/homelessness, and workforce development, to name just a few. They are here today with nearly 90 staff, program participants, seniors, coalition partners, community members, and youth from the Muslim Educational Trust to advocate for the needs of our communities. Urban League, we thank you for being here today. Colleagues, if you see the Urban League around the building, please extend a warm welcome. Thank you.
All right, you jump into the
Thank you, Representative. Further courtesies, Representative Nelson.
Right here. There's a little delay. Sorry about that. As you can see, our Legislative Day of Action in March was filled with trainings on how a bill becomes law, group discussion, and preparation for meetings with legislators on our issues. Again, a big shout out to the community and organizations that came out and support and made the day a success. Because of our efforts and support and your support, our folks were able to meet with legislators regarding several policies that we're interested in. Pass it to Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. And I meant to include that we met with over, 30 legislators, which is amazing, with so many folks that we brought to the Capitol. So just want to review some of the issues that were key this past legislative session for us. One of the biggest is our Pathways to Empowerment, which is actually our Oregon for All of Us empowerment program. And this program, is one that focuses on community. So it's a program that's focused on economic stabilization and housing retention program, offered via an integrated culturally specific services model. Program participants receive wraparound support in achieving economic empowerment, wellness, and liberation from the oppressive forces that determine our community's outcomes. Additionally, Oregon for All of Us Empowerment Program does the following. 100% of our program participants receive short-term housing support in the form of legal advocacy, diversion, emergency housing support, rapid rehousing placement, and or eviction prevention. They complete a budget, a resource map, and complete a stability assessment. 90% of program participants remain in housing for 12 months after the rent subsidy ends. They have to identify as African American or Black. And we've seen increases in stability within, at least 3 domains within 6 months of enrollment. And lastly, 75% of program participants increase income through benefit acquisition or employment, complete career mapping, resume building, interview skills, soft skills training, and overcoming backgrounds, barriers, and disclosure training. And lastly, they secure employment as it relates to their career map goals. So we're really seeing that, programs such as Oregon for All of Us Empowerment Program really serves a need in the community, and has been highly effective in getting folks to a state of instability to stability, and it provides them the tools to stay there so that, they are not falling back into potentially unstable situations such as houselessness. Next slide, please. Another great win was securing additional funding for the Economic Equity Investment Program. Though we did secure funding, it wasn't as much as we would have liked, unfortunately, but it still is going to meet the needs that we see in the community. And so, by successfully, securing these funds, we're going to hopefully re-up our application to the program so that, we can re-grant monies to small Black-owned businesses who are doing great work in the community. And the purpose of this funding, which stems from the Equity Investment Act, is so that, these grants go to organizations that are building affordable housing throughout rural Oregon and providing financial assistance for farm workers and other first-time buyers. It's also elevating small business development resources and training for entrepreneurs operating on the Warm Springs and Umatilla Indian reservations and across all of Oregon. And lastly, it's offering IDA services to underprivileged youth and providing match savings programs in rural and urban Oregon to help families invest for their future. So clearly there's a demonstrated need. Clearly great work is being done by the folks who are receiving those small grants from us, and also other grantees that applied for this funding. And so we're hopeful that, next session we can go back and secure additional dollars for this fund so we can continue to do that re-granting and continue to see the growth of so many great things that are happening out in the States. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Miles to talk a little bit about the People's Budget.
Thank you so much. Fair Shot for All recognizes that together, culturally specific organizations, labor unions, and community-based organizations accomplish more. Fair Shot for All was created to build on organization strengths. Each coalition member brings time, people, and resources to our fight against economic, racial, and gender inequality. One of our top priorities this session was also on the agenda for the Fair Shot for All Coalition, of which the Urban League of Portland is a founder and steering committee member. Each year, our coalition creates the Fair Shot Priority Agenda and the People's Budget to provide Oregon legislators with a clear set of policy and funding priorities to advance racial, gender, and economic justice in our state. Despite harmful walkouts that threatened our families and communities, our legislative champions and supporters held strong to advance forward-thinking policies and investments. In the upcoming legislative session, Oregonians are counting on legislators to make meaningful progress on the state's toughest challenges through strategic investments in our growing budget surplus. There's more work to do to ensure every Oregonian has access to housing, childcare, healthcare, food, justice, and of course, to strengthen our workforce. Next slide, please. The People's Budget had some great wins during the session, such as Employment-Related Daycare, or ERDC, for $171.2 million. Caregiving is the work that makes all other work possible. Oregon families and employers rely on the availability and accessibility of high-quality childcare in every corner of the state. More than 16,000 Oregon families rely on ERDC in order to work, go to school, and pay their bills. These investments in childcare will keep parents working and ensure kids get the early education they deserve. We will continue to fight for full funding for ERDC to protect the stability of the families in the program and end the waitlist that is holding back 1,900 plus families from participating. Additionally, rental assistance and homeless prevention was funded for $41 million. Rent assistance is the single most effective tool at preventing eviction and homelessness, making sure that landlords get paid and tenants stay housed. Rent and other homelessness prevention programs by community-based and culturally specific organizations are critical to reaching the Oregonians in every county in the state who are most vulnerable. $7 million for the Urban League's homelessness program, homelessness prevention program, and $34 million in rental assistance include a 30% set aside for culturally responsive organizations, means more Oregonians, including people who identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, will have stable housing. Next, Healthy Homes was funded for $15 million. When everyone in our community has a healthy home with affordable utility bills, it enhances housing security for our most vulnerable Oregonians. 54% of Oregonians live in housing built before 1978 that is energy inefficient and in need of repairs and weatherproofing. Senate Bill 1530 included $15 million for Healthy Homes. As a result, Oregonians on the front lines of climate disaster, including people of color, low-income families, folks with disabilities, and those in rural areas, will be safer from extreme weather events, wildfires, and earthquakes. Senate Bill 1530 provides funding for heat pumps, heating infrastructure, and cooling shelters so that low-income Oregonians can save on utility bills and become more resilient against the climate crisis. And then finally, restorative justice was funded for $4 million. Restorative justice is a survivor-centered approach to accountability that focuses on promoting healing for those who have been harmed and on fostering true internal accountability for those who have caused harm. This community-based approach to harm serves as an alternative to prosecution. Restorative justice thereby creates a mechanism for relieving the pressure on Oregon's overburdened court and public defense systems and reducing the state's reliance on incarceration, while of course making communities safer. Restorative justice programs first received funding less than 2 years ago. And in that short time, 6 new programs were born and 2 pre-existing programs were able to significantly expand their services. Early results are incredibly promising. $4 million in ongoing funding means this important work will continue to realize restorative justice full potential, to deliver a just and safe place for all. Next slide, please. And then finally, Oregon had an incredible opportunity to win hundreds of millions in federal investment, grow our economy in an equitable way, and make progress towards the childcare system we need. By adjusting existing state programs, this will allow Oregon businesses to unlock federal funds through the CHIPS Act, the new federal law to boost computer chip production in the United States. With the passage of House Bill 4098, childcare in areas most needed for our construction workforce will increase to meet the considerations put forth in the CHIPS Act. These subsidies are critical for Oregon children and families childcare providers, and employers, and we are happy to say that that bill has passed. I will now pass it to my colleague, Stephanie.
Thank you, Miles. A statewide summer learning program will foster success for all Oregon students by improving readiness to learn, promoting academic achievement, and providing safe, healthy, and enriching ways to grow as individuals during the summer months. Recent studies have demonstrated that summer learning reduces learning losses, accelerates learning, and addresses equity issues by narrowing the achievement gaps between socioeconomic groups. House Bill 4082, which was going to provide funding this year, it passed. With the passage of House Bill 4082, $50 million will be invested for summer 2024 to support the partnerships between our school districts, education service districts, tribal nations, counties, cities, libraries, and community organizations. Summer funding will provide incentives to strongly encourage school districts to partner. They will receive formula grants in minimum criteria as they will receive formula grants with the minimum criteria being met, such as having an existing plan for summer learning programs, being able to provide a minimum of 80 hours of summer programming on their own through tribal and community partnerships. Summer programming will be required to meet all the following goals. This includes academic enrichment based on the state academic standards, youth development, including hands-on and social emotional learning, and lastly, equitable access and family partnership, which is also inclusive of culturally and linguistically responsive. Alrighty, so going back to the Fair Shot for All People's budget, there are a few items that we were unsuccessful this session. So the first one would be Oregon Worker Relief. The Oregon Worker Relief has been a lifeline to immigrant Oregonians through programs including the Climate Change Fund, the Home Fund, and universal representation. The community-led approach has helped over 93,000 immigrant Oregonians through emergency relief for farm workers who face dangerous working conditions through extreme and wildfire smoke, rent assistance to keep families housed, and no-cost immigration legal services. The second item that didn't pass this session was school-based health centers. Many young people in Oregon still lack adequate access to the health care they need and mental health care in particular due to stigma. A lack of health insurance, an insurance policy with limited coverage, a lack of understanding about how to access care, poor access to transportation, especially in rural areas, and a lack of medical providers providing care under the Oregon Health Plan has led to inadequate services. School-based health centers address each of these barriers by providing all school-aged youth with the care they need, whether they have private insurance, public assistance, or no insurance. Lastly, student emergency needs unfortunately did not pass this session. That entails college and university students in Oregon are reporting increased rates of food insecurity, housing instability, and challenges affording and accessing textbooks, transportation, childcare, and other basic needs. In 2021, the Oregon State Legislature took a critical step to addressing student basic needs insecurities by passing House Bill 2835, the Benefits Navigator Bill. This legislation was designed to close opportunity gaps, facilitate economic mobility by addressing access to federal, state, and local benefits for low-income students at community colleges and public universities. It has not kept up with student demand. Funding basic needs and affordable textbooks is an essential component to comprehensive statewide affordability, a statewide comprehensive affordability strategy for college students. And I will now pass it over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Stephanie. And so one area where we were not successful was stopping the passage of House Bill 4002, which is a reform of Measure 110, or as we say, the recriminalization of drugs. And so I'd like to really speak to the complexity of this bill with a flow chart. As we know or anticipate that we will be back in legislative sessions that will follow to really discuss kind of where the pitfalls are and the impact to community. And so with this flow chart, it really is looking at, well, let me back up. So HB 4002 was passed, and it is optional to counties to create the deflection programs, meaning that if someone is experiencing crisis, they are given the opportunity to get treatment to address that crisis. So counties have to opt into creating these deflection programs. And then on top of that, these deflection programs are then reliant upon the discretion of a police officer to offer them to a person who is in crisis. So not only are you hopeful and depending upon a county to come up with a deflection program, if they don't already have one, that meets the needs, or at least meets the kind of general best practices of what a deflection program should look like, you now are relying upon a police officer to offer up that option if it even exists in that county. So kind of two things need to happen. You need to have a deflection program and you need to be offered it. And so a police officer can come across a person who is in crisis and say, look, you can either go to jail or you can go through this deflection program. And so the person chooses out of those two options. Ideally, they are choosing deflection. And so if they go through deflection, there's this whole route that they have to go through, and everything has to work out just right in order for them to go through this process without criminal charges, without, quite frankly, potentially experiencing harm due to detox, etc. If they're in jail because there's no beds available at a program, they're going to detox there. And if the jail is not equipped to meet the needs of that person who is detoxing, that potentially could be a pretty dangerous and harrowing experience for that person. And so this bill also does not take into account the fact that in the state of Oregon, we do not have enough lawyers who are doing public defense work to meet the need of folks who need representation. And so I believe that's roughly about 2,000 people that are currently without representation. So anyone that goes through this process and is facing charges who needs a public defender has to then join the line behind all the current folks who are waiting for representation. And a lot can happen in that time in terms of, the clock just runs out and that person is released with charges, or the clock runs out, the charges are dismissed, or the clock runs out and the person doesn't get the services that they need. And so if the person goes through the process, goes through the deflection, and then comes to the court to say, look, I've gone through deflection, I can prove that I've successfully, completed deflection, then all of those charges are dropped. And so it's a very complicated and everything has to work out just right kind of process in order for this to really, I think, meet the intention that drafters of this bill and supporters of this piece of legislation have in this process of testifying and advocating in opposition. Our communities showed out in droves at the public hearings and really spoke to their own experiences and how they felt that this bill would not help their communities. And the data has shown that there is going to be a disparate impact to Black and Brown communities. And we have yet to hear, we being the Urban League of Portland, have yet to hear a clear plan for how the legislature, how counties, how police and public defenders, or the criminal justice system, I should say, plan to mitigate those harms. And so I fully expect, as the Director of Advocacy and Public Policy, to be back, probably not next session, but maybe the next long session, to work on fixes to this bill. I hope that I am wrong. I hope that this works as they, claim it will, and that folks will get the services that they need. But we also know that there's just not enough resources to meet the need. And so, hopefully I'm wrong, and hopefully things work out. But history and their own data has shown that we fully anticipate there being some issues that we're going to have to address, and that we're going to have some folks that are going to have to be made whole because of the harm of HB 4002. So with that, I want to pause and really ask if there are questions that folks have about any of the pieces of legislation that we worked on. Yeah, and if you have questions, you're more than happy to put them in the chat, or if you would like to come off mute, please do so and just introduce yourself and ask your question. And if we did so great that y'all don't have questions, that's also fine. But I would encourage you that if after this event, you're like, ooh, I really had this burning question that I wish I would have asked, please reach out to us at ACE, ACE at ulpdx.org. But I do see that there is a question oh, great, it's not a question. We much appreciate the feedback. Yeah.
I hope this fits in.
Yeah.
Especially since you explained 4002. I've always been concerned. I had thought that we came to a point where people who are in prison can vote. Or what's going on with voter engagement in jails and prisons?
That is a great question. So the previous long session, the Urban League was part of a coalition of organizations that were working on a bill to enfranchise folks who are currently incarcerated, because as we know, that's one of the biggest populations of Black and Brown folks in the state of Oregon or currently in our prison systems. And, we are of the mind and of the feeling that just because you have committed a crime, that does not strip you from voting rights. And so, that bill unfortunately was not successful in making it to a secondary hearing, but it is a piece of legislation that we will continue to work on. And there is some movement, and I think there is a general interest to make it happen. I think it is just a question of the mechanics of how do you do that and what are the costs. So we will continue to have that conversation with stakeholders. It is important to us that those who can vote should be able to do so. And that, as we move forward, we will continue to work on that issue and hopefully be successful. But thank you for the question. Anyone else? Again, we will put in the chat our email address. So if you have questions after this event, please reach out to us. I do encourage you, speaking of voting, we have a series of Meet the Candidate forums that will be happening starting on April 15th and running for 2 weeks. So there'll be ample time to hear from candidates on a number of issues, especially criminal justice reform and HB 4002. And so if you have questions that you want to ask, reach out to us. All of these candidate forums will be live streamed on our webpage. So you'll be able to look at them on both Facebook and YouTube. They will be recorded. Our goal is that as you receive your ballot, as you receive your voter pamphlet, you'll be able to use these candidate forums as a tool so that you can make an informed decision about who you support. I want to be clear for anyone who is listening and who will watch this after the fact. We are a 501c3 organization, meaning that we are neutral. We do not endorse any one candidate. Our role and responsibility here at the Urban League is to provide a platform for all candidates who want to engage with our communities to come, be asked questions and be on the record on where they stand on those issues, and make the best case for themselves as to why a voter should vote for them. To be clear, this is not going to be a debate, so there won't be necessarily crosstalk or engagement. It really is a one-to-one conversation between a community member who's going to be our moderator, asking questions of all the candidates, and then responding on those issues. So again, the kickoff April 15th. If you haven't already, please look at the links that are in the chat. You also can go to our website at ulpdx.org under the events tab to see when those candidate forums are happening, and make note of them on your calendars. And with that, we thank you for your time and for spending, this lunch hour with us, and just encourage you to talk to your friends and family about watching those candidate forums. And yeah, thank you so much. Have a great one, everyone. Thank you.